Well, thanks everybody for coming. Really appreciate your time. We'll get started here. I'm going to do some talking, and then hopefully we can all talk together towards the end. I don't know, I haven't done this before, so we'll see. This particular presentation, we'll see how much time we have. So, yeah, there's the title screen. What is whiteness? Everybody seems to be having a problem with this idea. I've heard several different definitions, but this to me is the most concrete for me. Whiteness is a concept that European people and culture are more important than anything or anyone else. It includes a study of the structures that reinforce this idea. This presentation is about where this idea comes from and how it became so entrenched in our culture. And forgive me for reading the slides. I don't normally read the slides, but I thought this definition thing was really important. Okay. So this whiteness is, I'm going to do some reading off of this too also because I haven't memorized everything, okay? I hope that's okay. So whiteness is a concept that describes a cultural, lingual, institutional beliefs, practices, and behavior that maintains access to power and reinforces power for white people and people of lighter skin tones. This colonial system was created for and by Europeans for the benefit of Europeans. Everything was and is in relation to the European. This is a hallmark of the concept of whiteness, that everything is judged in relation to whiteness and not something else. This presentation is not meant to be a comprehensive everything about whiteness, okay? We got very little time. I'm going to try to go through a lot of content here. So, here's a definition from Merriam-Webster. Colonialism. What is colonialism? The quality or state of being colonial. Something characteristic of a colony. Control by one power over a dependent area or people. A policy advocating or based on such control. This is where whiteness in the Americas begins. It begins with the arrival of Europeans in the Americas. When Europeans conquered what was to become the Americas, they also established a racial caste system based on skin color. The darker one was, the lower they were on the social scale. Does this sound familiar? Whiteness is a concept that describes the cultural, lingual, institutional beliefs, practices, and behavior that maintains access to power and reinforces power for white people and people of lighter skin tones, and those that adhere to whiteness. This colonial system was created for Europeans, for the benefit of Europeans. Again, I'm saying this again because it's important to remember. Everything's important, everything's in relation to the European. Whiteness was used to distinguish the Europeans from the Indians or black slaves that they had during the initial time of colonialism. Preferential treatment was based on skin color and European descent. This is really where whiteness begins in the Americas. This new concept of whiteness and the importance of white people and culture in relation to others laid the foundation and provided the essential framework for what was to become contemporary whiteness. Wow. Being an Indian would suck in that context. And I would not want to associate myself with anything indigenous in that context. I would want to distance myself from it. Here we have a casta painting. Has anybody ever seen one of these casta paintings? No? These are paintings that break down racial categories. It was a hierarchical system of race classification created by Spanish elites in Hispanic America during the Spanish colonial period. This Sistema de Castas, or the Society of Castas, was used in 17th and 18th centuries in Spanish America and the Spanish Philippines to describe as a whole and socially rank the mixed race people who were born during the post-conquest period. The Casta series represents different racial mixtures that derive from the offspring of unions between Spaniards and Indians, mestizos, Spaniards and blacks, mulattoes, blacks and Indians, zombos. Subsequent intermixtures produced a mesmerizing racial taxonomy that included such labels as no te entiendo, no te entiendo. It means like, I don't know who you are or what you are. An offspring of so many racial mixtures that made ancestry difficult to determine. Or salta atrás, a jump backward, which could denote African ancestry. Okay. Once there were children produced from unions between whites and non-whites, a matrix of whiteness was needed to maintain control, and it was created. This is where these ideas of mulatto and mestizo and other variations of whiteness come from. Take a good look at this image and think about how it relates to contemporary whiteness. This image illustrates perfectly the whiteness that is embedded in communities of color as well. Not just in white society, these ideas are embedded in all of colonial society. So oftentimes you'll see lighter skinned Hispanics mistreating darker skinned Hispanics or Indians, right? Somebody once told me they were in Texas and some people mistreated them, and I thought to myself, they were saying that wasn't a whiteness thing, but I thought to myself, wow, like they're fully impacted by colonialism, so yes, it probably was a whiteness thing. Preferential treatment was always given to the lighter skin tone people in this context. This is how entrenched whiteness is. This is how entrenched it is in our minds. It's powerfully subconscious. These paintings show the importance of whiteness to the Spanish from the very beginning of their conquest. The resultant mixture with indigenous African and Asian people led to a complex hierarchy. We already talked about that. So here, Latinos in large part have lost their indigeneity. They distance themselves from their indigenous heritage. It's smart because you get more benefits from it. Even today in Mexico, Indians are super mistreated. That's why the Chiapas stuff happens, right? So it's always been advantageous to associate yourself with whiteness or lighter skin tone, white ideas, white culture. If you want something, benefits, you don't want to be mutilated or otherwise hurt, be as white as you can. These indigenous people were not savages by any means. They lived in a state of high culture. The Spaniards were shocked when they got here. And these are Spaniards that had been like around the world. They had seen Paris already. And they were like flabbergasted by the beauty and the amazing culture that was in the Americas when they got here. So, let's see here. You always want to stay away from the dark. You want to stay with the white because you're going to get more privileges. Like in my skin color right here is really advantageous and it's valued in the Latino community. I hate to say this in public, but it's true. This is an aspect of whiteness. It's not just white people that are impacted by this. Okay. It's been a long time since the Europeans arrived here, and these ideas have become entrenched. They're subconscious. So again, these new structures and organizations that were created and implemented contain the idea that European people and culture are more important than anything or anyone else. This idea is still alive today in our country. It's embedded all over the place. If you watch the news, you can see the way other people are described. You can see this idea embedded in that. The racial hierarchy in combination with the destruction of the indigenous cultures by book burning, destroying cultural monuments, and using them to build churches, right? That's whiteness right there. And the enslavement of the indigenous people did much to reinforce the casta system, the system of whiteness. Our, meaning Latinos, indigenousness has been written out of history books. It's been derided, and our people have been discriminated against and persecuted according to their skin color. As a matter of fact, when you look at a lot of these so-called illegal aliens, they're Indians. You can see it in their faces. They have the right to migrate anywhere they want in their country. Not immigrate or emigrate. Migrate. They can immigrate or emigrate too, right? It's their continent. How dare somebody from somewhere else come and say that they don't belong here, that we don't belong here, right? Here's a sick thing right here. This is, I put the arrows in, I got to say, but I got the breakdown from somebody else. This is a hierarchy right here, a hierarchy. I'm not saying everybody had this exact same hierarchy, but you get the idea. The wider, the better, the darker, the worse. The wider, Españoles get all the privileges. The negros, they're a slave. They could be beaten, killed, raped, burned, mutilated in any manner people decided to. This system was brutally enforced. There are strict rules about who could be with who and do what with whom. This system was directly related to slavery and servitude. Those Europeans didn't want to be working real hard when they could have brown and black slaves doing the work for them, huh? So, again, consequently, the amount of distance one puts from the bottom to the top is directly related to the amount of privileges and a higher lifestyle one would get. And then we have the institution of American slavery. Yay! Slavery and whiteness go together like snow and skiing. Yes, snow and skiing. They've always been with us since the Europeans came to the U.S. and created the notion of whiteness, that the world was created for the benefit of white people and their allies to use as they choose. Whiteness helped form the world of slavery in the Americas. Slavery formed the basis for the economies of the Americas. Whiteness and remnants of slavery are embedded in the world and the economies birthed in American slavery. Blacks and Indians were treated as chattel property, abused, mutilated, raped. Abuse, mutilations, rapes, and beatings were all regular occurrences, daily, multiple times daily sometimes. One could be branded, etc. I already talked about that. Slavery is such a disgusting thing, I can't even imagine. It makes me sick. And it exists today, right, around the world still. Some sick people. Here's a picture of some slaves doing work for Europeans in the American South in the early 1860s. Again, the strict systematic racial hierarchies were created and brutally enforced in this system as well. They had people that lived in the houses with their masters and stuff that had more privileges. They were often raped, and they had kids that were lighter skin toned, and those kids tended to get more privileges and treated better. And when I say brutally enforced, I mean they were whipped, tortured. You know how people talk about ISIS, right? And how brutal and gnarly they are? Well, slave owners of the South probably beat ISIS in brutality, right? If they had an out-of-hand slave that was pregnant, they'd dig a hole so she could put her stomach in the hole, and they could beat her so the baby would not be hurt. Because that's some property there, so that's some money, right? Who's brutal? Here's another example of fine treatment by their owners. They spent a lot of time developing torturous techniques to be used to quell rebellious slaves. The most despicable punishments were meted out to generations of people over and over again. This barbarity continues on to the present via police chokeholds. See Eric Garner die there? And other punishments, right? What's that place called? Homan in Chicago, right? They're devised for unruly black and brown people to this day. Unruly black and brown people, those that don't adhere to whiteness, are shot dead, locked up in prison, or otherwise abused and mistreated by their fellow citizens. The use of patrols to capture runaway slaves is one of the precursors of formal police forces, especially in the South. Slave patrols were organized groups of 3 to 6 white men who enforced discipline upon black slaves during the antebellum U.S. southern states. The police are seen by many today to be racial enforcers. They are seen as a colonial strong arm in black and brown neighborhoods. They are most often seen as occupiers, and they are occupiers. They're not public servants. Mistreatment, beatings, rapes, robbery, bribe demands, and other behavior is expected by many communities of color when they encounter the police. I don't expect to be treated fairly. As a matter of fact, I've had the cops pull my arms down and check me for track marks. Hey, ask me questions like, what gang are you in? When was the last time you were arrested, Mr. Macias? Is that even a question? This stuff's still embedded in present day. That says 1946, but that badge is still the same today. Doesn't look exactly the same, but the symbol is there. Here's a late 19th century view of people of color. These images display the concept that it's a white man's burden to bring up these uncivilized people to civilization. Civilization meaning whiteness. White culture, white religion, white education, white thinking. The truth is, though, if you're not white, you're never going to be accepted as being a civilized person because you can't be white. When civilization and white are synonymous, it's impossible. These ideas still exist in our culture. You can see them in news reports, hear them in discussions about other countries in the American superior way, the whiteness way. Here's another example of the white man's burden, another late 19th century view. This is published in 1899 in McClure's magazine, Paris So. The idea that European culture and people are more important than anything else, they have the answers. This is the admiral that conquered the Philippines here. Can't remember his name. Admiral George Dewey is washing his hands. This guy's giving some soap right here. Here you go. I'll give you the stuff that might make you white, clean. The idea that European culture and people is more important was spread throughout the world via U.S. imperialism during this time in the 19th century and the 20th century as well. Here's another form of whiteness. It's also genocide. These children were stolen away from their families, indigenous children. You might say this, oh yeah, Max, this was a long time ago. But I have a friend that's 56 that went to one of these schools. You should hear some of the horror stories he's told me about the abuse of children. Kill the Indian, save the white man was the mantra. And indigenous people, we were sold the lie that assimilation could work. But the truth is, no, if you're black or brown, it's not going to work. Look at Obama. To me, that guy's as white as anybody can be, as far as his white adherence to whiteness in his head. Is he accepted? No. He's been attacked. He's been attacked a lot worse than I don't want to say that. His predecessor, who got us into these unwinnable wars, completely idiotic. But again, the concept that European people and culture are more important than anything or anyone else is still maintained. So what we know to us comes via a system that believes European people and culture are more important than anything or anyone else. Sorry I keep saying that, but I'm trying to get that point across. What does this do to information? How does it impact the knowledge that we create with this information? What does this mean to education and the pursuit of truth? How does it impact those who adhere to whiteness? White people and anybody adhering to whiteness. What does it do to the truth that they're trying to find? African Americans have never been accepted as white. They've always been ostracized from the American way of life for the most part. They're colonized subjects within a colony. Segregation, lack of educational resources, lack of opportunities are all hallmarks of being black in the U.S. It behooves those who don't want these hallmarks to adhere to whiteness as much as possible to get the goodies, right? To get the goodies. To not be shot. But it don't matter, no matter if you're a student or what, you can still be shot. So, I see people adhering to whiteness. That's exemplified to me in too many people of culture who achieve success, and they then distance themselves away from their color, and they cling to whiteness like it's a lifesaver, and their ocean liner just sunk because they don't want to fall back down into the darkness. This is a screenshot I took from a recent article in Slate magazine. I did not put that caption there. What's the implicit message of images like these? I see a lot of these images. How does this image right here relate to this image? Does it relate? Think about that. Things don't change much in a society based on whiteness. Think about these images for a second. Here's the South Bronx in the 1970s on the left. And this is a slave quarter from Belmont Plantation, Colbert County, Alabama. Contemporary racial disparities based on whiteness in Baltimore on the left. You've seen The Wire, you've probably seen this stuff. Contemporary racial disparity based on whiteness in Saskatoon, Canada. Please think about these images for a second. These images are symbolic of whiteness. To me, I think they're deep. To me, that looks like the way they used to treat slaves. This is how black and brown kids are treated at school. Our kids are over-disciplined from an early age, from preschool on. Right? Even after Brown versus education, schools are still segregated. Black and brown schools are patrolled by police, and brutality occurs often to students of color. I've seen about 6 other videos since this video came out a while back of kids getting beaten the shit out of by cops. Kids. They get detention, suspension, and other academic marginalization consequences meted out to them. And oftentimes like this, there's violence involved. Right? Yeah, schools should look like that, and they should be more like that. A place where everyone's welcome. Schools should be and must be supportive of all people. All people. They should be accepting, edifying, and challenging to all students. Schools need to have disciplinary actions that are nonviolent, even if the children are not white. Schools should not uphold whiteness as an ideal of education. Oh yeah, one other thing about whiteness is it can be adhered to by non-white people. Now we have, what's her name, Loretta Lynch. This is it's an equivalent right here, our former Attorney General. Him, Loretta Lynch, all these people, they really adhere to whiteness. The system of whiteness, which is the US government and culture. They purport they want to help people of color, yet they adhere to a system that destroys people of color, locks them in prison, destroys them. I say that these people are the main reason why there has been no progress in equity, diversity, and inclusion in our schools. Because they don't use the power that's given to them to create change. They adhere to whiteness, to that lifesaver, and make some good money, and have a good time, and be treated like the high-level slaves used to be treated. So slavery is embedded all over in contemporary culture. I've tried to show that with a badge and what I'm talking about here. Here's another more striking view, I think, of how it's embedded in our culture. It takes different forms. Whiteness is fluid. It changes. It's not a thing I can point to and say, here it is, let's look at it. I'll show you a 360 view of it. So the brutalities that were used to enforce the racial hierarchies of yesterday are still with us today. They used to come in the form of lynchings back in the days of Jim Crow. Now they come in the forms of police shootings of unarmed African Americans and Latinos in far greater numbers than whites. They come in vigilante shootings of unarmed African Americans, for example, Trayvon Martin, etc. And this stuff. So yeah, this room's kind of weird, but if you guys could break up into small groups and maybe talk, here's some questions to start a little discussion here. Thank you everybody for coming, please. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.